What is up, people? It is Dave, it is Duncan, back from Metal Epidemic for another album review. And for this review, Duncan and I have been checking out the new album from Californian Mathcore quartet, Cel Damage. The band's new album, No Volume, will be released on July 14th via Silent Pendulum Records.
It's also not instructions on how to listen to the album.
No, it's not.
More volume. Mo volume. We're actually sure that it's not Mo volume and they just forgot to put the little...
I think it's no, but you know.
Alright, fine. Well, I know what they're saying. More volume, more problems.
I think this might be the third Silent Pendulum album we've reviewed in the last month. I feel like we've spoken about Silent Pendulum Records quite a lot in the last wee while.
I will take your word for it. I cannot remember what I did an hour and a half ago, let alone how many albums from Silent Pendulum we have or have not reviewed.
Pretty sure we did.
When's that check clearing, Dave?
Cha-ching. Perched in California's high desert, the region north of LA, marked by towns like Apple Valley and Hesperia, Cel Damage have been creating music at a furious pace since its formation in 2014. Upcoming new album, No Volume, is the band's 12th release in a decade.
Not entirely sure they know how to spell anyway, because they spelled Cel wrong, but we'll not get picky at that.
Let's not.
You know what the Brits are like, Dave? Pick at these things, these American lazy bastards. When it comes to spelling, not when it comes to writing music.
Well, that's true. Fairly busy band. Our local scene is pretty eclectic, says frontman Danny Matthews. I feel like the music scene is vastly different from the majority of people here. I mean, the people in the scene are more progressive than the people that are living here. No Volume was engineered and mixed by Brad Racine at Local Man Studios and mastered by Nick Townsend at Infrasonic Sound. The album is yet another high point for Silent Pendulum Records, the Brooklyn-based label helmed by drummer Michael Cadnar, whose roster boasts Glass Casket.
Oh, right, it's all coming together.
Sleep Sculptor.
Yep.
Seek. And Dr. Akula, which we haven't reviewed, but the other three we have reviewed just recently, among others. So it seems like they've been releasing EPs and albums like nobody's business, Duncan. Although this was the first release I'd heard from Cel Damage.
Yeah, like peek behind the curtain for the people out there. We are podcasting tonight, so we always do less reviews on a podcast day because our podcasts run fucking long, and you should check them out because they're generally pretty funny and eclectically they cover a lot of what we've been listening to. But we decided we'll pick a short one, which this one is. This is a really short album. Yeah. But we're like, maybe we go with this one, and I played just something I found very fast over the microphone to Dave, and I think it was about a 1.5 minute track, and within the first 30 seconds we were both like, yep. Like for the whole album, just like, yep, we're doing that.
Yeah. I decided to go back and check out some of their early work. And although it all has like a similar kind of tone running through it, you can hear like there's a shift in some areas, some styles. The early releases had more of a kind of like chaotic hardcore punk kind of vibe to it, but you can hear as the releases go on, they start to add in more like experimental moments, a bit more mathcore and metalcore, but a grind in there as well. Almost similar to like a Callous Dowboys timeline. They started
stealing words right from the... why'd I even fucking bother, Dave? Steal my notes.
Very similar path to Callous Dowboys. So I won't mention them again. Maybe there is a real mix of genres going on here on this release, but the album kind of sets its stall out in what can only be described as a kind of underground rave scene from the movie Blade, where you have this like 20 seconds or so of this kind of lo-fi kind of techno.
Yeah, I'm fairly sure I've watched a cheesy 80s porno with this playing in the background. Almost 100% sure.
But I mean, it's only like 20 odd seconds, and then like
20 odd seconds of fucking awesome is what it is, Dave.
yeah, that's true. That's true. And then like the chaos kind of erupts, and then from that point on, you're really just kind of hanging on for dear life. Really, these guys they don't hold back like
No.
for a second really on this. That these tracks are they switch between like I was getting like a kind of like late 90s, almost like early 2000s kind of bit of kind of like savage metalcore, but there's furious blast beats and grind riffs, and then you've got this kind of like contorted mathcore-esque kind of rhythms going on there as well. But it's kind of coated in this like Cel Damage personality as well. And it's, as you said, it's literally over in a matter of minutes.
No, yeah.
Like 17 to be exact, and it's done. The songs are like a couple of minutes each, if that.
I mean, the average runtime is just over a minute.
Yeah.
There's a couple of songs that push that out, because if they weren't on it, the average runtime would be under a minute per song.
Yeah. So there's no real kind of time to get acquainted with any of them really. But thankfully the album is super short, so it does make it easy to go back and kind of give it extra spins. I got a lot of nostalgia from this. I felt like there's a lot of moments where they were kind of like paying homage to that kind of late 90s, early 2000s era, where it was like a totally different beast from, you know, what it is now. Back then,
like
it was
if,
like...
I was about to say, if Trustkill
Yes.
were still
Trustkill.
like prominent as a label, like Cel Damage would be on Trustkill.
Yeah, well,
you can
that's
see that.
Totally right. Yeah, I was getting that Trustkill, like Ferret Music type kind of
Ferret,
vibe.
yeah, exactly. Those two little labels that were just churning out basically our soundtrack to basically like what 1999 through fucking 2007.
Yeah, very chaotic, very rough around the edges, than it is like kind of now, or even the last kind of 10 years. But now like the kind of metalcore, mathcore, even hardcore to an extent is a bit more precise and a bit more like polished, well produced. This album isn't quite like that. It has an older kind of feel to me. It has that kind of anarchy and that kind of raw edge to it that a lot of kind of modern interpretations of the style is kind of missing. So I did enjoy that side of it. It's also very quirky in places, and that's cool to hear because you can hear the band's personality coming through on the album.
Yeah.
I'd say a lot of that, or quite a lot of that, is in the vocals, which have that kind of eccentricity to them. But musically as well, like it's very kind of jagged and start-stop, quite hyperactive in places. They like to give you kind of random bits of noise or lead work, you know, just to make the whole thing feel quite deranged. And there are definite moments on the album where, even though the tracks are short, they do kind of strike gold. There's moments that kind of really caught my attention. If You're Going to Be a Ghost, Are You Going to Watch Me? Which is, I think that was the first track that I listened to like all the way through. I think it's the first single that they actually released. And I can kind of see why. It's got a really kind of good balance of that like just utter bedlam and punishing kind of brutality. The breakdown on that track is savage, and the kind of almost like the tempo and kind of the rhythm, it kind of took me back to that like kind of Hot Damn, Every Time I Die kind of era, which I really loved. They Said I Can Go to the Dance was another one that was quite kind of attention grabbing. I liked the little kind of smattering of kind of clean vocals that they added in that gave it a little bit more of a hook. That was the track where I did get that kind of Callous Dowboys kind of hint from it or vibe from it. There's some really cool breakdowns on Mount Moon. I like the kind of glitchy electronic type stuff they're doing on Medium Talent. And I think it was George Wilson, which is track 9, and has a guest vocal on it. I think it's a guy from Traditions. Probably my favourite breakdown of the album, where it's just absolutely bludgeoning, but the vocals are guttural, really low, and it kind of gives the riff even more kind of impact. The other track that I want to mention is Such a Sad Moment to Somebody's Dreams and Aspirations Cut Short. They don't do like short album track titles on this at all.
No, the chance that by the time you've said the track out loud, the track will have finished.
Yeah,
so.
absolutely. That track kind of made me chuckle because there's a sample running through it, which they do on occasion through the album, but I clocked it straight away because it's one of my favourite scenes in The American Office, where Dwight sets fire to the office because no one listened to his fire safety talk. And he just kind of sits back and watches all the chaos of no one knowing what to do. But it has that kind of Michael Scott line where he shouts, "Oh my God, okay, it's happening," right at the start. And I was like, "Oh, wait a minute, that's The Office." And I was kind of like having a wee laugh to myself, but it was really cool. And it kind of added a little bit kind of humour to the track as well, even though the music is not funny in the slightest. It's like very still chaotic and visceral in its delivery. It's not an album without its flaws for me. I think my kind of first issue was, although it has moments, I feel like it didn't have enough moments to keep me fully engaged the whole time. I feel like it's an album with kind of snippets of greatness. Then there are parts where the individuality maybe fades a little bit, and it could be a number of different bands that I'm listening to. And then those parts I found maybe were just a little bit kind of forgettable. I think they have the ferocity channeled perfectly. It's an album just full of rage and bludgeoning riffs, but I think there's maybe a little bit of refinement still needing just to kind of bring it up a notch or two, and kind of keep you hooked in for longer. It's also quite a constant album, so maybe more of a shift in intensity might break it up a little bit. I really like the little clean vocal they threw in, so maybe a couple more of those might work as well. The other thing I want to mention was the production, which I think is pretty...
You're not going to talk about that snare drum, no?
That's exactly what I'm going to talk about, yes.
It's all I could think. Every time the snares hit, I'm like that. Dave.
Yeah. You know me so well.
Dave. Like that, honestly, all the way through, I'm just like, that's a Davey snare if ever I fucking heard one.
The snare, it reminded... The problem I had was it reminded me of my old Roland TD6 electronic drum kit.
Yep.
Where the snare just sounds artificial to me. It's just a bit kind of flat sounding. So that was kind of in the back of my mind.
Oh, I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah,
I was to me, like with I would have thought it would have stood out as being a negative if the band hadn't had other electronic elements in it. So to me, it kind of just went with the aesthetic.
Just a personal thing. I just didn't like the tone of it at all. But I love the guitar tone. The bass sounds really girthy, and they really let that come through on a lot of the tracks. And the vocals have got plenty of character and variety as well, so that kind of kept me interested. But yeah, lots of positives. And there were bits that I enjoyed, but then there were some areas where I felt like it could use a bit more development, but kind of it's going in the right direction. Like, because I've listened to the older stuff, you can hear the evolvement in their sound as you hear each release. So there's definitely kind of movement forward for them, and I think they are going to get better and better through time. What about yourself? What do you think?
I enjoyed this more than you.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, this year's been kind of cool for like genuinely jaggy, erratic music, and I'm kind of digging it. I'm noticing there's a little trend kind of working its way through here, which Duncan's kind of on board with. I don't know if I hadn't already heard like the stuff that See You Next Tuesday put out this year, if I would have just been so willing to embrace a lot of what I've heard here. But you kind of touched on one of my big talking points here is, like, I'd kind of moved away from a lot of this music, kind of post Dillinger, or even not even post Dillinger, even Dillinger were moving away from the kind of really jaggy, mathy shit towards the end for something more refined and a bit more clever. And the Callous Cowboys were a band that to me just like put it back on the map with the fucking, like, they planted the flag hard, so much so that no one was pulling that flag out, Dave. And I genuinely, since then, I've been kind of wanting to find anything that is just substantially jaggy and on the fringe. And we've already checked out Squid Pisser this year, which in itself shares a lot of elements here. It's a far more polished, refined piece of work, but I think both albums are about the same length.
Yeah.
So yeah, I kind of came into it like a bit more open-minded,
Mhm.
and I think what Cel Damage have in spades, and to be honest, grindcore as a genre actually has in spades, maybe more than any other genre, is personality. Like, you can get a grasp very, very quickly of a band's personality in the grind genre than you can in any other genre. Like, you go and see Cannibal Corpse, and it's bludgeoning brutal metal, and then you hear the guys talking between, and it's all tongue in cheek. You know, that to the innocent bystander hearing the lyrics of Ghost, they might be like, "That this is the most satanic band ever." Then you go and see them live, and you realize it's a pantomime. So,
Yeah.
like, is that kind of weighing of things up? But like in grindcore, for whatever reason, you know what bands are trying to make you feel really uncomfortable and really ill, a la Pig Destroyer or Napalm Death. And the bands that are like kind of spiking the punch with hallucinogens, like Cel Damage. Cel Damage, like this album, No Volume, is like what you would get if you had a kid with ADHD, gave him a bag of sugar, a spirograph, and a kaleidoscope, and then put on, I don't know, fucking Calculating Infinity in the background and say, have fun. Oh, here's a Rubik's Cube while you're at it. It's just so vibrant and just so full on from almost the start right through, but there is a ton of personality that shines through everywhere. I think you're right. I think the breakdowns are really interesting because they have different levels of breakdown that they'll utilize instead of just the standard kind of metalcore breakdown. They're actually very smart with it, and sometimes the breakdowns don't last that long at all.
Yeah.
And then there's other tracks. George Wilson's a great example where the breakdown feels like it's, you know, in about 4 or 5 different steps of what they're doing, and then they start adding additional elements over the top that just makes it sound like anarchy. But it's very controlled at all times. This album, as dangerous as it sounds, kind of like juggling fucking grenades and walking through a minefield. You know what I mean? It's like any misplaced step is absolute annihilation. But the band have this surprisingly under control all the way through it, and I kind of fell in love with that aspect about it. I think where the band really shine are when those elements of the kind of synth and electronic work bolster what the band's doing. They Said I Can Go to the Dance is a great example of that. Like the kind of middle section of that has some really bizarre synth work that sits, you know, kind of weirdly behind things. I think it's Moon has like an organ sound on it as well, which is kind of cool. It's out of place and it's not like prominent in the mix, but it makes the guitar sound thicker and kind of strange. So when the heavier riff comes in, it just sounds like gigantically heavier. And I'm not entirely sure it is. I just think it's the kind of playful elements I've had in the background. If you're going to be a ghost, Are You Going to Watch Me? Has a wonderful breakdown section, which, and I think it shows to the great level of production on this one, where the bass just gets a couple of seconds just to shine, and it stands out. And it was the first time I was like, oh, there's the bass, and then I was hyper focused on it all the way through the rest of the album, and it's there. It's just I was so caught up in everything else in the first 3 tracks before it that I hadn't even paid attention, and then after that I was laser focused to the sound. It's fucking big sounding, and I kind of love that. I think you're right as well. I think there are elements here, especially in the playfulness, that do remind me of very early Every Time I Die. We said the same about Callous Dead Boys as well, where I think we're at that 20-year itch where bands are now, that's an album that was very important and people are now taking influences from it, and guess what? I'm fucking there for it. You just keep doing that shit and it'll make me happy. Vocally, I think this is great. I think there's a kind of high scream tone. There is a savage mid-range tone, which fucking Corey Taylor would sell his auntie for. It did. At times it reminded me of very, very early Slipknot. Just that tone that it had where it just sounded like pure distortion. Like the microphone is there, and he is just like fucking Ross Robinson ain't giving a fuck. He's just like, just keep going, Corey. Here's a fucking plot pant. Or a plant plot, not a plot pant. Either or, neither nor. I'm the one that made up English. I just slagged them off for English
I know.
earlier on, and I can't even fucking get a grasp it. Sorry, Cel Damage. But yeah, like it's on that register of just being so distorted.
Yeah.
But then there's this low tone that they have, and it doesn't come out much. But when it does, I'm fucking getting a chubby. It's fucking great. And I think it's those levels. And then you mentioned it as well. There's just smidges of melody, which isn't overused. I know you're saying you would like more of it. I actually don't know if I would, not in the 17 minutes. I think if the album was longer, yes, certainly I would have more of it. But I think those moments are these kind of shining beacons because they're infrequently used. I also think there's a lot of bands that have now adopted the, let's be honest, Dillinger Escape Plan element of we're a, jaggy, nasty, dirty, scuzzy, out there sounding band, but our singer can sing, or our guitarist can sing, and they've infused a lot of melody in that,
Yeah.
and kind of harken back to that older sound, that kind of like very, very, very early to mid 2000s. The bands didn't have a lot of that. Every Time I Die didn't have a lot of that.
No.
Like the melody was always just a tiny little bit out of key, or it was never quite in there. And then you see where Keith ended up, and he was on the fucking money with everything. So I kind of like that. The last thing, which was the production that you mentioned, I like it. I heard the snare drum, and I did think Dave's going to have comments. That's why I actually thought you were going to start by saying, well, let's talk about the drums. To me, it's not that much of it. It's clearly an electronic sound, or it's been gated in such a way and compressed that there's no ring at all to it. It's just like bang, like that. It's like, it does sound like it's been triggered in some way.
Yeah.
But I kind of liked it. I liked it with the rest of what was going on. It kind of just all settled in really well. It's difficult for me to pick too many holes in it. I think for what it's trying to do, I actually think it does it really, really well. I don't know if I'd want this any longer, if I'm honest. I've listened to it 4 times, and I gave it time in between because I was exhausted by the time I was Catfish finished. And then to come back round, I don't think it's as good as Squid Pisser, who I think had a sheen and polish to them that I think will appeal to like a bigger crowd. But that being said, I'd never heard of these guys before, and I am genuinely excited that I now have. This is the album that's now put them on my radar, and they're a band that I will definitely be keeping my eyes open for moving forward. They're doing stuff here that I just think is really, really interesting, and they're doing it, and it constantly feels like it's just riding the edge of absurdity, and they manage to just keep it on that line pretty much all the way through, which is a fine craft in itself. So yeah, I think we'll find it in the grades. I think I enjoyed this a bit more than you.
I think so. Okay, so scores for the new album from Cel Damage. It's a difficult one. I like the heavy stuff. I think they are good at it. It does sound like, a lot of other stuff. But I just found that overall maybe there was just more hooks needed, something to make it more kind of memorable for me. And yeah, the snare just wasn't for me personally. Didn't love it.
I'm glad that they only play it once in the entire.
But as I said, I think they've got potential to take it up another notch or two, and it's super short, so it's not an album that you'll regret spending your time on. It's like 17 minutes. I'm going to go 3 out of 5 on this one.
Yeah.
What are you thinking?
I am definitely coming in higher. I'm giving this a 4. Yeah, I really, really like this. I like I said, it scratches an itch. It's an itch that I didn't have for a long time, and it's this kind of grind. Grind's the only way I can describe it, even though it's not grindcore, but that kind of offshoot of grind, grind adjacent genre is slowly churning away some really fucking interesting albums this year that I'm hoping people from veterans like See You Next Tuesday, who have come back on the scene with a bang, but you know, and to an extent, Cel Damage are also a veteran if they've been on the go since 2014. but like bands like Squid, who are just kind of relatively new in the scene as well. There's a lot of really exciting stuff out there, and it is niche, and it's never going to be mainstream, and it's never going to shift millions of units. But in the right time, the right place, the right mindset, and you're right in saying 17 minutes. I mean,
you could have listened to the album instead of listening to a review.
Yeah, almost twice.
Done.
Almost twice. So yeah, I think it's definitely one people should check out, and they're definitely a band that you should keep your eyes on. I don't even think we're scratching the surface of what these guys could do because they show so much.
Yeah. Okay, the new Cel Damage album out on July 14th on Silent Pendulum. Links below to the band, to the pre-order. Check it out, let us know what you think, stick some comments in. That is the review. Thank you for checking it out. We'll be back with another review very soon, but until then, take care. Speak to you soon.
Bye everyone.